Hello everyone and welcome to Books in the World, the Cape Cod Writers Center book talk show. Cape Cod Writers Center is now in its 55th year on the Cape. We're very proud of that, and Books in the World is the longest running book talk cable TV show in the United States. So we're delighted to be here to talk to all of you about the local authors that we meet and others who come through the Cape, especially in the summer. And today we have a treat because it's a beautiful Cape summer day, and we have a book called Cape Cod and the Islands, Where Beauty and History Meet, and our author is Kathryn Kleekamp. Hi, Kathryn, how are you?
Hi, thank you. What a privilege. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking with you. I am a fairly new Cape person, a wash ashore, and if you have a love for the Cape or you're developing a love for the Cape, your book just feeds one's soul, and I'm just delighted. Where Beauty and History Meet. Now, your coverage of history is phenomenal. I know you as an artist, and I think of you as an artist because I've seen your work, but this book brings the history of the Cape, and I'm interested in your journey as how did you come to bring this all together?
Well, what a question. I've lived here 20 years, and I'm still a wash ashore, I'm sure. The book, I started painting, we retired here in 1997, and I started painting. We had a little bit more time. Our children had grown, left the house, and I found that I really enjoyed it. I started selling my artwork, and one thing I did from the very beginning with the prints that I made, the original art and prints, I would tell the story behind each one. If it was a lighthouse or a ship captain's home or a beach, I would tell the story, and a written story on the back of the print. And I realized after about 6 or 7 years, I had a compilation that would work well. It could easily evolve into a book. So I approached Schiffer Publishing, and they got back to me literally within weeks and said, "We'd love to give you a contract." And I think part of it was there was no other book like that with not only the art, the book has about 60 paintings, but also the stories behind the art.
So you became an artist after quite a different background. Can you just tell us a little bit about your life before you came to the Cape?
It's a different background, but in many ways it's similar. I was a microbiologist. I have a graduate degree in clinical microbiology. I dropped out of school after I finished a PhD program. Before I finished my dissertation, I wanted to get married. I was 30 and I thought, enough time, I want to get married and have children. So I worked part-time. When my children were in school, I worked generally in hospital laboratories, and the last place I worked was at Leahy Clinic for about 10 years, Leahy Clinic in Burlington. So then I retired, and many people will say, gosh, science, art, they're very different. But it's my contention that art is not so much how you hold a paintbrush or the paint you use, but it's how you see things. And I think all of those years looking through a microscope really helped me focus on fine detail. And that, I think, has really helped the art part of it.
Yeah. Well, when I looked at this book, I thought this is 400 years of history in an art book, which is something that you don't always see together. And I thought about your background in microbiology, and I assume some technical writing. Did you do some technical writing? I mean, I like to talk about writing in the process of writing, since this is the Cape Cod Writers Center program. So how did you develop your research and writing skills?
I did do technical articles such as Arcanobacterium hemolyticum, and
oh, really?
a new organism, things that most people would totally glaze over. But now that you mention that, I did do some freelance just writing about struggles of being a parent, or for our church I did an article on a young boy from Vietnam who was a survivor of Pol Pot and went on to become a young missionary. So I did small writing things, purely freelance. I had no training. And I really found I enjoyed the process. Many people find writing a struggle, but I think when you have something to say, and particularly for me with this Cape Cod book, the love I have and have always had for Cape Cod. Before we moved here, we had vacationed here for about 40 years, would always come to the Cape. So there was a genuine love that I think inspires and it gives you that creative urge that you need to do something.
Well, this book is a second edition, which is a coup in itself to be asked to update and revise something, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But would you describe some of the work involved in producing a second edition, and specifically in this book?
Yeah, well, the first book, for example, takes the reader from the very early beginnings of Cape Cod, the landing on Provincetown. And what I tried to do, I never cared for history too much in high school, college. And the reason, and I think many people say this, it was names and dates and places that you had to memorize. What I tried to do with the book is to use journal entries and letters and find bits of information that most people didn't know about. For example, Provincetown. Then going into the next chapters go into how each town was organized and settled, and some of the differences and the challenges there. Then going on to agriculture, because most people now, I think they think of Cape Cod as this fishing surrounded by sea, when in fact for 100 years it was agriculture that formed the basis of the individuals and what they did on Cape Cod. Then going into fishing. Again, fishing wasn't always there. It was just the shellfish that the early colonists took advantage of, and then it led to bigger fishing, cod, and then deep sea fishing, then into the shipmasters, then into the lifesavers. So the book evolved along those lines. Then going into the innovative, the great people who lived on Cape Cod, Marconi, Belmont, who built the Cape Cod Canal.
Great story.
Woods Hole, the great innovators. Woods Hole is now a worldwide institution. So that was kind of the line of development. And then with the second edition, what the publisher wanted was, I remember the telephone conversation. They said, you know, you've written about the beauty and the history. What's being done to preserve the beauty and the history of Cape Cod? So that led to a full chapter then on conservation efforts.
I would love to talk in a little bit detail about the conservation efforts, because it's fascinating, and as in all your summaries you have pulled together salient facts that are easily absorbed, and I commend you on it, and I tell anybody who'll ask me that this book is a great read. It's not just something that you flip through the pictures, although you do flip through the pictures. We're going to save a few minutes to talk about the conservation efforts, but the art journey. I'd like to talk a little bit about the type of art that you have picked and have perfected for yourself, and how that came about. Your pictures are somewhat primitive in certain places, and that's a style that you have adopted. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I think when I started, after I retired, started painting, what enchanted me was all of the different villages. Sandwich Village, where I live, Falmouth, Chatham. Each village has its own characteristics. So I started with a more primitive style of painting. And what I did, I think the viewer will see a picture of Sandwich. That's actually how Sandwich is today. but I put in old-fashioned figures, and one, you could travel back in time and think it's the 18th century by the old-time figures. Same thing with Chatham, Provincetown. They have retained a lot of that historical look. But then as I developed a little bit more stylistically with painting, I found I also like doing landscapes or seascapes. So that type of painting is very different. And I think perhaps I had that kind of freedom, and I think as others do who don't have formal training and don't get locked into one kind of genre. So it makes it far more interesting to me to be able, okay, I'm in the mood today to do a swan or wildlife, and I'll do that.
We have the swan picture on the set here, and it's just very beautiful, and I just love looking at it, and I have read your description of why you painted this. Can you summarize that little story about the swans?
We live on a pond. We live on Sham Pond, and usually each year the swans will have their cluster of cygnets. And one year, and usually you see them just around Mother's Day, it's the first week in May, they would come by, bring the babies, the pen and the cob would bring the cygnets, and it was like they were just so proud of their family. So a couple of weeks later, the cygnets, one by one, had diminished, and there were no cygnets left. So it's sad, but that's nature. And what happened that year, this is about 5 years ago, they had a second clutch. And I didn't know that swans could do that after they had their cygnets, to have another one. And she stayed on the nest weeks and weeks. And I thought, she's psychotic. She wanted those babies so bad, and she lost them. But wouldn't you know, she had another clutch of 6 cygnets. And I was very happy, brought them by. About a week later, she and the pen were alone. And I thought, oh no, it happened again. She came to the shore, she opened her wings, and one by one, they plopped off. So they weren't destroyed, and that second clutch actually grew up, and we watched them as the pen taught them to fly, and they ultimately flew away, because usually the parents will kick the juveniles out. But that was a photo, I did that from a photo, that the last little guy was having trouble getting off. He didn't know which way to go. I ran to the house, got a camera, and was able to get that shot.
The little one behind her
Yeah.
neck there. That's
Yeah.
great. Oh my. So back to the subject of the revision. You went to a lot of historical societies and collected letters, and you met a lot of people. I said to you, the acknowledgments are like a who's who of local history. And I have met a few people from the Marston's Mills Historical Society and the Barnstable people, and I know how dedicated people are. You must have enjoyed working with them.
Very much, and I was surprised how genuinely welcoming they were, and how willing to share information. I would just, outstanding, Mary Siccio, who's in the Historical Library of Cape Cod Community College, was wonderful. I would ask her for a letter or a reference, and she would, oh, and I thought you might like this as well. Oh, and here's something else. She would just bring me far more than I asked for. Hope Morrill, who was the curator at the National Park Service in Eastham at the Visitor Center, likewise was wonderful in hunting many of the old photographs I have in the book of the lighthouses, the lifesavers, the shacks where the lifesavers would rest in the middle of the night when they were walking the beaches looking for shipwrecks. So they were wonderful. Likewise on Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, more than willing to share what they had. So that was a great privilege, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, they're wonderful. You mentioned Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, and I want to be sure people know that you do a very thorough coverage of both. I don't know if you've spent a lot of time on those islands or whether it's your love of research or whatever, but they didn't get short shrift at all. You have lovely chapters on both of them.
I gave each a chapter because they're certainly worthy of it. They're doing amazing things, Nantucket, with preserving the land. And both, for me, both places are magical. When I go to Sconset at the edge of Nantucket, it's a place truly like no other. And I think so often they do get short-shifted. Everything is Cape Cod, and I just felt it would be nice to include them.
Speaking of Sconset, you have an anecdote about how the Sconset cabins were there as shelters for the fishermen and the people who had to be out at that end. And then at some time of year, the people from the town wanted to go out there to catch the breezes. Do you remember that piece?
I do, I do, primarily because the smell of the whale oil on the ships was so repulsive in the community. I mean, we see it now as this charming village, but the odors were tremendous. And then ultimately that led to what Sconset is now, a very elite, in a way, those little fishermen houses, I'm sure are very prime real estate right now.
Yeah. I didn't think of them as the place to get away to if you lived in one of those big whaling captains' houses, but I read that in your book. I was very taken by that. Another piece of the revision that you have mentioned is the Cape Cod Baseball League. You have a nice new picture of that one. How did you come to be interested in this?
One of the things, I don't know if I just mentioned this, but one of the wonderful things about writing a revision is that you realize you left important things out. And in that interim between the first edition and this, our grandsons became involved with the Cape Cod youth, the summer youth programs. So we went to some of the games, and they're quintessential old Cape Cod. You have top-rate players who are playing, who are willing to sign autographs, very good. They're scholar athletes, so it's a very good quality baseball. And as I started looking into that, I found out that it's the premier summer league in the country. And over the years, over 1,000 alum have played in the major leagues. In 2015, there were 292 players who played in the major leagues. And I can't give you any famous names, but good.
I was so interested in this. Why don't you finish your sentence? I'm sorry.
But they are a vital part of the major league games.
Well, I was interested enough to look up on their website because I guess I had kind of known for some reason that Jason Varitek was a Cape Cod Baseball League player, and then I found that Nomar Garcia-Paro was, Mo Vaughn, and many of the people have also gone on to the Baseball Hall of Fame, you know, the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So there are quite a few people who any baseball fans watching our show would know their names and be very impressed if they probably already know it because baseball people know all these things. But
so you will get recognition in edition number 3.
Well, I'll do the research because I have friends. I have a friend who played in the Cape Cod Baseball League, and what you say is that they come out of the colleges. They're known as college baseball players. They're not just talented kids playing in their sandlot baseball teams. But anyway.
And there's more than that. I mean, it's quite a big organization with the host families that host these players.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of community involvement too.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. You mentioned that, and I think was on a house tour in Katuitt recently, and someone pointed out that they had a bedroom that they had put aside for a Cape Cod Baseball League person, and they made that part of the tour to tell us that. So that was kind of cute. But getting back to a couple of things about the book. First, I want to be sure that people know that that technical as well as the poetic writing is really a joy to read, and I was going to read some quotes, but I want to leave some time for our discussion about the conservation issues. This is a keepsake, and it's something that people would enjoy owning, and at the end we'll tell them how to get it, so let's not forget that part. But let's talk a little bit about the conservation chapter and what are some of the things that you cover and why.
Well, that was challenging. I think probably the most challenging thing, because any one aspect, let me back up a minute. What I thought would be important to do was to look at clean water, which is a big issue on the Cape, not only drinking water, but the water in our estuaries. Estuary restoration, beach erosion, and renewable energy, as well as open land and preserving the land. Any one of those would have multiple volumes by itself. So it was a challenge trying to focus in on what to write about each. And I explain that in the book, that it's not meant to be an incredibly comprehensive book. What I wanted to do, my goal with that chapter, was for those people who are visiting Cape Cod to get a sense of how serious these problems are and what we're doing to deal with them. So for beach erosion, for example, I looked at the storm Juno that hit. It was the nor'easter that hit the Cape in 2015.
Right.
The huge damage that did with Ballston Beach, for example, lost 200, a break in the dunes of 200 feet. And Sandwich had tremendous erosion that actually the water came up to Route 6A in Sandwich, washed away many homes and interfered with a lot of the problems in town. So that was a challenge in that sense. I got a little advice from my son, who's a civil engineer on the Cape, and he works with in these areas. Another aspect was clean water. I wondered how many people who come to the Cape, who come to these glorious beaches, really appreciate what a struggle it is to have one clean water aquifer and to be able to have clean drinking water. With all of the home building and fertilizer that goes into the water, how big a problem it is to keep our estuaries clean. So I tried to cover those areas in readable fashion, because it can easily get extremely technical, and I wanted to be obviously accurate without being too simple. So that was quite a challenge.
It's done well, and I have to say, I live on a cranberry bog area in Marston's Mills, and then there's a pond system there, so I'm aware of some of those nitrogen issues. But even things that you tend to be peripherally aware of but don't know in great detail, you give enough background so you can say, oh yes, that nitrogen issue or the aquifer issue, or go by Cape Cod Community College and you see the solar panels, and there's a big array of them in the Barnstable landfill area. So you're kind of peripherally aware of these things, but maybe don't have the information at hand, and it's very helpful to have it. In fact, there was a section that you have on the Wellfleet estuary. That was something completely new to me. I don't know anything about that.
The Herring River estuary, the restoration of that is one of the largest restoration projects in the Northeast. It's been going on for decades in terms of the planning, at one time that was over 1,000 acres of pristine estuary, millions of herring that would then attract the larger fish, beautiful wildlife, all of the migrating birds would pass. And at the turn of the century, some developers had a very misguided idea to block off the water coming from Cape Cod Bay. So instead of 160 feet of the tide coming in and out and cleaning the estuary, it was narrowed down to 18 feet. The long-term result of that was that the water became extremely toxic, all the fish died, indigenous plants that were healthy died, and a lot of non-indigenous vegetation took over. The result was that 1,000 acres came down to only 10 acres of estuary.
Wow.
So the what is in store is it's a major project, $50 million project. The Park Service is working with the town of Wellfleet in a relationship to work on that, and that will once again be opened up to the full over 160 feet with a gradual allowance. Obviously they can't let the tide come all in at once. It will gradually be let in to restore. So it's a major project.
I'm smiling at you because we are coming to the end of our discussion, and I want to give you a minute and me a minute to urge people to take a look at this book. It's available I've seen it in many local bookstores, from the Daniel Webster Inn to Titcomb's to everywhere. But I want them to also ask for it in libraries and go to your website. Would you like to tell us about that multiple copy discount?
Sure. My website is www.sandwichart.com. And if one, I think this is a nice book for a corporate gift or a business gift. And the nice thing is, if such a organization would order directly from the publisher, they get a 40% discount, which is sizable.
Well, good luck with that. I think it's a great idea. Thank you for coming.
And thank you.
I hope
thank you so much.
Everyone enjoys this book as much as I did, and as you probably did putting it together. So thank you very much.
You're most welcome. My pleasure.